Hey, this is Frank. The car I've got in the shop today is a Toyota MR2 Spyder. It has a 2zz swap with C60 transmission, and the transmission has gone bad. So we're going to replace it with another C60 transmission, and we're going to walk you through the steps of how to do that. Probably most of you know that the engine and transmission are in the back of the car. We're going to start by clearing out everything that's in the way of getting access to the top of the transmission. So we have this brace that has to come out, battery and battery tray have to come out, and we'll start with that and we'll see what's next. Now the battery tray. For the bottom bolt on the tray, we do need an extension. I'm going to remove this cold air intake in order to have a little bit better access. I will loosen the clamp that holds the intake to the throttle body, and then the intake should come right out. So on the intake we have the electrical connector for the MAF. We have some hoses and connectors for the evap purge valve, canister purge valve. So we're going to undo those and get the intake out. Alright, so now we have a little bit better access to everything underneath here. And our next step is going to be to take out the starter, and one of the starter bolts is right under the throttle body, somewhere in here. We just have to reach and feel around for it. So we'll do that next. We'll take the top bolt from the top, and then we'll take the second bolt out from under the car. So for the starter bolt, it's a 14mm hex, and I'll get to it with this long extension. Here's our starter bolt. Now I'm looking up at the starter from under the car. It has one bolt that you can see right where I'm shining the light, 14mm. Then you're going to have the bolt that attaches the live wire from the battery, and you can see it is under the plastic cover. And then we have the solenoid, the plug for the solenoid, so we'll just undo all of those to get the starter out. So looking up at the starter, I'm going to start with the cable connector that's on the back of the starter. It's either a 10mm or a 12. Let's unplug this oil sensor, get it out of the way. So the cable is removed, and now we disconnect the solenoid. Okay, so now the solenoid is disconnected, and this leaves the 14mm bolt right here. So here's the bottom starter bolt, and the starter should now be free to come out. Here it is. Looks like the original starter. So while I'm under here, I'm going to remove some of these bolts that hold the transmission to the block that are accessible from underneath. There's one 14mm right here. There's another 14mm that should be right here, but it's missing. And then up here, just above the CV shaft, there's a 17mm that can be accessed from down under here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I thought this was a 17 up here, but I couldn't see it clearly. It's actually a 14. And after I break it loose, I reach in with an extension. So I'm going to finish that bolt from up above. Next we're going to turn our attention to the axles. Driver side axle right there, passenger side axle right there. This is going to make our job easier to get these out. So let's move ahead with that. So that completes one side, and we'll move on to the other axle on the other side. Okay, so the axle is free from the hub, and on this side I just need to get the axle free from the bearing carrier. And it comes right out. And I'm just using these zip ties on both sides for strain relief. Okay, so now both axles are out. We've got the starter out. We've got the bottom bolts out. Now we need to go back on top and complete disconnecting the transmission from the harness, and we'll disconnect it from the shifter cables. We also have to do the slave cylinder, clutch slave cylinder, and we're getting there. Just a few more things to do, then we'll take out the motor mounts and drop the transmission. Okay, we're getting there. So whoever worked on this before made a real nice tangle down here. We've got these coolant hoses all tangled up in a knot, and we're just gonna disconnect these and get them out of the way, because it'll make it just a lot easier than trying to work around them. But what we got to do here is we've got the ends of the shifter cables. There's two of them. There's one that you can see, and the other one is right over here behind this, under this hose. So we got to get both shifter cable ends off of the transmission. We have ground wire that bolts down onto the transmission. We need to get that off. Then we have not really visible here, but we have the reverse sensor that plugs into the harness. It's right underneath this big tangle of stuff. So we're gonna disconnect that, and then we have the brackets for the shifter cable, for the shifter cables, and once I get the hoses out of the way, you'll be able to see those. Okay, so I got the coolant hoses out of the way, and now I can see those infamous clips. There's one right here, and one slightly in front of it right here. And the way I get these off is with this flat blade screwdriver. I'm just gonna get in from the back side of the clip, okay, and pry it off. And I have a video that shows exactly how to do this. I'm not going to be able to do it here. I don't have good enough lighting. to show you on this video, but refer to the link to the other video. So with the hoses out of the way, we can see a little bit more clearly what there is to deal with. The cables, shifter cables, came out of their clips right here. Unfortunately, we had to destroy both clips in order to remove them. They're not going to be reusable, and you should regard these as a consumable item. Okay, we've disconnected the reverse sensor. It has a pigtail that goes up into the harness. It's disconnected. We've removed the cable ends from the linkages right here. Okay, so the cables are free of the transmission, and we can now go underneath the car and do the slave cylinder. So for the slave cylinder, which is right under here, we have the line goes through the motor mount. Okay, it goes through the motor mount bracket, and there's no way to take it out of the bracket without breaking the line open, and then afterwards you have to bleed the slave cylinder again, which is a huge pain. So we're going to avoid doing that, and the way that we're going to avoid doing that is by first remove the motor mount off the frame rail, and then we'll remove the bracket off of the transmission, and that way we won't have to break the line open. So there you can see I've disconnected the bracket, removed the motor mount, disconnected the bracket from the transmission. The clutch cylinder, the slave cylinder hydraulic line goes right through that bracket, and now you can see the slave cylinder, and the slave cylinder is right up there, and it has two bolts on top, two 12mm bolts. So we'll just undo those, and the entire slave cylinder and its hydraulic lines will be free from the transmission. And so there is our slave cylinder. It is all its glory, with the hydraulic line going through the motor mount. So we got the front motor mount or transmission mount out of the way, and it was mounted right up here on the firewall. And it has the hydraulic line for the slave cylinder going through it. So what we did is took off the motor mount, then we unfastened this bracket from the transmission and just hung everything out of the way here. Next we're going to do this rear motor mount, and it has a bracket that attaches to the transmission, and the motor mount has bolts going up through the cross member. So we're just going to unfasten these, take the motor mount off, and then remove, we can actually leave the bracket on. There's no need to unfasten it from the transmission on the car. This motor mount attaches with a 17mm hex bolt. So the motor mount is out of there, and it came out of these 4 holes in the cross member. And to get the motor mount out of the bracket, you have to support the weight of the engine so that the bolt can come loose. So at this point, the only thing holding up the transmission are these 2 bolts in the top right here. This is one, and the other one is just a little bit down this way. They're 17mm, and I'm going to show you what I do with these bolts to make the removal and installation of the new transmission easier. I have some specially made studs that I made from cutting up some bolts that have the same thread pattern as the transmission bolts, and these work on most Toyotas. They're M12 by 1.25, and I squared off the heads so I can turn them with a socket wrench if need be. And I'm going to substitute these two studs for the two bolts at the top of the transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So from this angle you can see those studs a little bit better. There is one sticking out right there, and the other one is right over there. Okay, there. And here. There. So what these do is they're going to allow the transmission to slide out away from the block while still being supported. Okay, so now I'm supporting the weight of the engine with this engine support bar, crossbar. And by turning that nut on the threaded bar, I can raise the engine, take enough of its weight off that I can release the bolt on the transmission mount on the driver's side. Okay, and the nice thing about this, the support bar, is that I can raise the car if I want to, and the car engine will remain supported. It's not like a jack where I'm supporting it from underneath. Then if I raise the car, I lose the support. So this is a very worthwhile tool if you want to do any engine or transmission work on any kind of car, and you can get these pretty inexpensively, like at Harbor Freight or any auto parts store in your area. So if I take enough weight off the mount by turning this bolt, then this transmission bolt down here goes loose, and I can just pull it right out. Okay, and now the entire engine and transmission assembly is free to be lowered down so that the transmission can slide off on those studs. Okay, so we're going to tilt it down at an angle, and with the C60, with the 6-speed, you absolutely need to tilt it down at an angle or it will not clear the frame. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so now I've tilted the engine down at an angle, and you can see that the transmission has started to separate from the block. It is still supported by those two studs on top. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go down to those 3 bolts that hold the motor mount bracket onto the transmission, and I'm going to undo those bolts and get that bracket out of the way, because it needs to come out of the way in order for the transmission to separate and clear the fender or the frame rail. So I've knocked it off, and it landed right onto a wooden dolly, furniture dolly that I placed right underneath. And yeah, all we gotta do now is lift up the car and roll the transmission out of the way. Just like laying an egg.